Hey everyone, Erick Stakelbeck here. Today on the Newscast, as empires rise and fall in the Middle East, they all want a piece of Jerusalem. Find out why, coming up. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. It's hard to believe, but it's been nearly 10 years since the so-called Arab Spring broke out throughout the Middle East and North Africa. Now, that series of revolutions quickly devolved into an Islamist winter, and the big winner, at least in the short term, was the Muslim Brotherhood. That did not last, but now, over the past decade, we've seen others vying to establish a new empire in the Middle East. Some failed, some seem to be succeeding, but all of them have one thing in common. They all want a piece of Jerusalem. We're going to get into it today. Before we do, I just want to encourage you to subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube, and be sure to click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We are bringing you the kind of cutting-edge, timely information and analysis that you just won't hear anywhere else, certainly not in the mainstream media. As a matter of fact, if you recall, about 10 years ago, the mainstream media was the biggest cheerleader for the Arab Spring, and as Arab leaders toppled and radical Islamists came to power, it seemed that the media and many in the left here in the US and in Europe just turned a blind eye and hoped for the best. Well, that didn't happen. Think back to the Muslim Brotherhood. They started to enforce radical rule in Egypt, which has historically been their power base. Thankfully, Mohammed Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood president, was overthrown in Egypt back in 2013 by President al-Sisi. So the Brotherhood, to lose their crown jewel in Egypt, that kind of put a big stall on their plans of expanding their power base and expanding their caliphate, reviving a caliphate throughout the Middle East. Remember, that's the sole reason for the existence of the Muslim Brotherhood movement, that is to revive and reestablish that Islamic caliphate, which was last disbanded after World War I. But when the Brotherhood came to power in Egypt, they were very excited, very optimistic. Also, an Islamist Brotherhood regime came to power in Tunisia. And of course, we have Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish tyrant, who is Muslim Brotherhood through and through, ruling with an iron fist across the Mediterranean in Turkey. The Brotherhood was making gains in other countries. In elections, they felt that the wind was at their backs, and as soon as Egypt fell, everything kind of unraveled, and that was that in terms of their plan. But while the Brotherhood is down, they are certainly not out. They're kind of like a jihadist vampire, I guess you would say. They're very tough to kill and very tough to keep down. So where they are definitely at a very low point right now, in particular in Egypt, again, their historic power base, they're still alive and they're still kicking, especially here, ironically enough, right here in the West, in Europe and the United States through various front groups. But the main man when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood movement today is undoubtedly Erdogan in Turkey. He's the greatest representative, I shouldn't say greatest, he's the most vocal, most visible, and most powerful representative of that Muslim Brotherhood movement today, which brings me to the focus of our newscast. I mentioned in the lead-in that empires rise and fall in the Middle East, and they all want a piece of Jerusalem, but in the past 10 years alone, folks, I thought it would be pretty interesting today and kind of fun to just do a review of what we've seen in the past 10 years alone in terms of empires or supposed empires or wannabe empires rising and falling in the Middle East. We mentioned the Muslim Brotherhood. They emerged from the ashes of that Islamist winter, also known as the Arab Spring, and it looked like they were ascendant. That was quickly crushed, and the Brotherhood is not a major player like Iran, obviously, which we'll talk about in a second, but the Brotherhood does have Erdogan in Turkey. So we went from the Brotherhood. We'll talk about Erdogan in a second as well. But we went to the Brotherhood, and what came out of that? ISIS emerged in 2013 in Iraq and Syria. Didn't come directly out of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's not what I mean. But out of the ashes of the fall of the Brotherhood in Egypt, we thought maybe that a caliphate was indeed developing with the Muslim Brotherhood at the head of it. More with the Brotherhood's slow strategy, winning elections in the Middle East and coming to power usually in that way. But ISIS, the Brotherhood, crushed in Egypt, weakened obviously globally as a result. And ISIS in 2013 emerges in a very strong way. Now, they had been there, elements of ISIS, for years, as we know, but they emerged as a powerful force in 2013, spreading from Syria into Iraq. And then ISIS. The caliphate started to emerge, right? Not quite in the form that we thought it was going to take under the Muslim Brotherhood. ISIS just ran roughshod over the region, over Iraq and Syria, conquered a territory the size of Great Britain. It's hard to believe, but they really did that. Back in 2014, they're beheading American journalists. They're saying, hey, this caliphate's going to expand. They were knocking on the door in Jordan and elsewhere in the region, had a presence in the Golan Heights, in Sinai to Israel's south. So ISIS was quickly leveling and conquering territory, and they actually declared a caliphate. They declared a new Islamic empire in 2014, but thankfully it was not to be. Just as the Muslim Brotherhood thought it was ascendant when Morsi came to power in Egypt, just as ISIS thought it was ascendant and at the vanguard of a new Islamic empire in 2014, that was quickly put to bed. President Trump kept his word, crushed the ISIS caliphate. So there goes one, we'll call them the wannabe empires. Brotherhood empire by the wayside, ISIS by the wayside. By the way, not to minimize the threat that both still pose, very active still and very much alive, but on the ropes undoubtedly, but not downplaying. Again, ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood movement are still very much alive, but we have to say they are certainly weakened from their high point earlier in the last decade, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. So that's kind of two wannabes. But Erdogan, again, the Muslim Brotherhood guy who used ISIS to his advantage very skillfully, letting ISIS fighters transit through Turkey into Syria in 2013, 2014, 15, 16. Erdogan knew the levers to pull, and he let these jihadist fighters do his dirty work, and then when the dust settles, he's there to be the caliph and to oversee and to rule over the caliphate. Remember, he's a guy who has great designs on being the new caliph and reviving that Ottoman Empire, that Ottoman Caliphate, which brings us to Jerusalem. Now, Erdogan, hey, the plan of the Brotherhood, ISIS, dead for now, but Erdogan, he shares their vision of a revived caliphate, and he's got his eyes on Jerusalem. He's made, as did the Brotherhood and ISIS, who threatened Jerusalem frequently during their heyday a few years ago. But Erdogan, just last week, and we talked about it on the Watchman News channel, on the Newscast, you can check it out in our archives. Erdogan literally said, Jerusalem is ours. It's a city that belongs to us, referring to the Turks. Now, you probably didn't hear about this in the mainstream media, but I think it's a pretty important story. He's directly threatening, essentially, Israel, a nation that Turkey still has relations with, at least officially, but under Erdogan's radical rule, Turkey obviously has turned viciously against Israel, and Jerusalem is in Erdogan's sights. He's talking about it on a frequent basis. He says, and he says it publicly, that Jerusalem should be under Islamic rule. Ideally for him, it would be the crown jewel of his revived caliphate. The interesting thing is, Erdogan isn't very subtle. Maybe he was a little bit more subtle in 2002 when he came to power, but now the gloves are clearly off. And although Turkey remains a NATO member under Erdogan's rule, we've said it here in the newscast before, right? I'll say it again. NINO. I refer to Turkey under Erdogan as NINO, NATO in name only. So they've got their sights on Jerusalem. They've got their sights on establishing a new empire in the Middle East. It's no secret why Erdogan's involved now in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, in the Mediterranean, in the dispute over natural gas, and also in the continuing conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. He's spreading his reach throughout the region, and he is projecting power. No coincidence there. And there's no better way to get the radical Islamic world on your side than to threaten Israel and Jerusalem. Which brings us to our next player in the empire stakes, the Iranian regime. Basically, the kings of threatening Israel and threatening Jerusalem and threatening America and the West, by the way, as well. So we have Erdogan looking to revive that Ottoman Empire, with Turkey once again at the head and reviving the glory days of the Ottoman Empire. But we have the Iranian regime looking to revive the ancient Persian Empire, which stretched as far as parts of Greece. Hard to believe, a massive empire, North Africa into India, a massive empire. Iran wants to head over or rule over their version of the caliphate, once again, a Shia version of the caliphate led by the Iranian regime. And here we go. When these folks say what they want to do, they telegraph exactly what they want to do, we should listen to them, because whether it's Erdogan, I just outlined how he's making moves throughout the region, or it's the Iranian regime in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, and Gaza, with a major presence there, essentially controlling those areas through proxy. When they share their radical vision, folks, their jihadist, genocidal vision, their expansionist vision of conquest, we should really listen to them, because it's not just bluster for domestic consumption. Erdogan, the Iranian regime, and in previous years, the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS, they attempted to shape policy around these ideological beliefs, and they took moves, made moves, to make them a reality. So Iran's doing the same thing, stretching its tentacles across the region, controlling proxies in critical countries, all near Israel's doorstep. And we talk about Erdogan obviously threatening Israel and Jerusalem. The undisputed kings in that unsavory department, up until Erdogan's recent emergence, has obviously been the Iranian regime. They call Jerusalem Al-Quds and Al-Aqsa, and they say that they will control it once again very soon. So again, whether it's a revived Ottoman Empire, whether it's a revived Persian Empire, both have designs on Jerusalem. Very interesting. The last player, I would say, up until the modern day, we've gone through 4 already, right? In the last 10 years alone, tell me, folks, we don't live in prophetic times, in Bible times today. These empires rising and falling, and more their eyes are set on Jerusalem. Okay, we reviewed the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt. We reviewed ISIS, the wannabe empires. Now the revived Ottoman Empire that Erdogan would like to head over, and also a revived Persian Empire that the mullahs in Tehran would like to head over, all in the past 10 years alone. And then we have the wild card, of course, Russia. It's no secret that Vladimir Putin would love to reestablish the Soviet domain, and a major part in that is having a presence in the Middle East. Guess what? He's got it right now. In September 2015, hard to believe, nearly 5 years ago, when Russian troops entered Syria to help bail out Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad at the behest and at the request, by the way, of the Iranian regime. Remember, Qasem Soleimani, the not-so-dearly departed terror master, he actually traveled to Moscow to lobby Russia to get involved and save Assad's tail in Syria. And that's exactly what happened. And some of our genius pundits, especially here in the West where I am, said, well, Russia's only going to be there for a short time, then they'll pack up their bags and go back to Russia. They're still there 5 years later. And guess what, folks? They're not going anywhere. To their minds, they're in the Middle East to stay, because the Middle East is the most critical and strategic region in the world. And what happens in the Middle East, we say it here often on the newscast, does not stay in the Middle East. So a revived Soviet empire, at least these are the goals. I'm not saying it's happening. I'm saying these are the goals of these respective leaders, whether it's Vladimir Putin, whether it's Erdogan in Turkey, whether it's Iran's mullahs. They want to revive the glory days, the days of old, the past empires. And man, that all centers around the Middle East and Jerusalem. All of them covet Jerusalem. Russia's not talking about seizing Jerusalem or anything like that. But rest assured, if a day comes, God forbid, where discussions of Jerusalem are on the table in some sort of future peace treaty, where there's a call to divide Jerusalem. Hey, Israel, give up half of Jerusalem, divide God's holy city, the city that he's given to Israel and the Jewish people forever, the city where he has clearly written his name. His word is very clear about it. You can rest assured that Russia would want to be involved in those discussions, because, as my good friend Chris Mitchell of CBN News says, I encourage you to check him out, his great show, Dateline Jerusalem. He says that all roads lead to Jerusalem. And Russia knows that. Everyone knows it in the world. He who controls Jerusalem, or at least has a say in who controls Jerusalem, has a great deal of power and influence in the Middle East and the world. Russia knows that. So, hey, The empires are vying. They're jockeying for position. The chess pieces are moving on the board. And this has all transpired again. Well, it's been going on for centuries, obviously, but I just thought it was interesting just thinking today when I said, hey, what do we talk about on the newscast? Just kind of reviewing the last 10 years and saying, wow, all of this, the sea changes in the Middle East over the past 10 years alone. And think of how this new Middle East is forming now, even as the wannabe empires, or emperors, I guess you could say, are jockeying for position and rising up. We have the new Middle East forming with the Sunni Arab nations turning away from the Muslim Brotherhood, turning away from the Iranian regime, and turning towards Israel. The battle lines are drawn. There's no gray areas. It's very black and white. You're either on the side of Israel or you are not. And Sunni Arab nations like Bahrain, the UAE, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, perhaps even Sudan, have chosen Israel over the likes of the Iranian axis and the budding, revived Ottoman Empire led by Erdogan in Turkey. We live in fascinating times. And by the way, we said how all roads lead to Jerusalem. Look at the book of Zechariah, chapter 12, verse 3, where God says a day is coming when all nations will be gathered against Jerusalem, and any nation, all nations that come against it will be cut to pieces. The book of Zechariah says Jerusalem will become like a burdensome stone, a cup of trembling for all nations that come against it. Again, God holds the deed to that land and to that city, the city of Jerusalem. It's a city where he has written his name forever. So, tread lightly to all the wannabe emperors out there and the budding caliphs who we've discussed today. Tread very lightly when it comes to Jerusalem. Hey, thank you for tuning in today. Quick mention real quick to watch the Watchman TV show. Hey, every Thursday night on TBN, that's 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 p.m. Eastern on Fridays. If you're not in the United States, catch it right here on YouTube. Subscribe to the Watchman News channel and click that notification bell, and you can see the show here and all sorts of great clips from the show if you don't have TBN in your home. By the way, big milestone coming. We are about to hit 100,000 subscribers here on our YouTube channel. Folks, I'm so excited because we want to bring this message that we are bringing you to a broader audience around the world, and God Almighty is opening the door for us to do just that. So before I go, I just want to thank you for tuning in here to the news channel. Hey, tell your friends, your family members, your neighbors, your coworkers about it. If the Middle East kind of doesn't make sense to you and it's all a jumble, we're making it simple. The Middle East made simple, I guess you would say, right here on the news channel. And for anyone, no matter where you live across the world, we're bringing home the point that it all matters to you. What happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. So stay in prayer. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. It's a biblical mandate. And until Thursday, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.